Have you ever been judged just for the way you walk? Or what you wear? Harold was 84 years old when he decided to leave home that afternoon. The sky was clear, the light wind swayed the trees in the neighborhood, and everything indicated that it would be just another ordinary day. He wore a worn flannel shirt, baggy pants, and a pair of sneakers that had seen better days. In his hands, a shopping list written in pen and a bag of coins counted one by one. Everything about him screamed simplicity, but no one there seemed willing to listen. As he pushed the old cart through the market aisles, discreet glances followed him. Muffled laughter came from the drink section. An employee was watching him from afar, as if he was already expecting something to be wrong. And Harold, he just wanted to bring rice, milk, and a bag of food for his dog. Nothing more. The scene was so common that it would go unnoticed by anyone. An elderly man walking slowly, looking at the shelves calmly, testing the prices with his wrinkled finger. But for some there, one detail was enough to trigger an alert: their age, their clothes, their tired appearance. And in today's world, this is enough to be treated as a threat. Have you ever felt that no matter what you do, people will always look at you with suspicion? Then you will understand exactly what Harold went through. When it was time to pay, he chose the ATM, as he always did, to avoid conversations, looks, and embarrassment. But his shaking hands made the process difficult. A packet of rice scanned wrong. He tried one more time, and the system crashed. A sharp sound echoed in the market. That thin, irritating siren that, in itself, already condemns without judgment. In seconds, everything changed. The laughter stopped. Conversations dropped. Looks turned. A security guard appeared out of nowhere, as if he was just waiting for that to happen, and the words that came next cut like a knife. "Sir, you will need to come with me now." No questions, no chance to explain. Just the automatic assumption that this simple man had tried to steal something. What you will discover now may surprise you. Because Harold wasn't just an old man trying to save money. He carried a story, one of those that you don't read in the newspapers or teach in schools. A story that was hidden in a photo folded inside the wallet. And when that photo came to light, no one in that market looked at him the same way again. Stay with me. Because what happened in the next few minutes was not just an act of justice. It was a lesson. The kind that makes us rethink how we treat others, and how time can erase even the greatest heroes. And it all started in that narrow hallway, between the cereal shelf and the milk refrigerator, with a man who just wanted to live in peace. The room where Harold was taken looked more like a storage room than a security room. The unpainted walls, the smell of damp cardboard, and cheap disinfectant, and an uncomfortable plastic chair set the tone. There, he was left alone for a few minutes, which seemed like hours. Nobody asked his name. No one cared why he was there. They just waited for him to confess what he hadn't even done. With his hands in his lap and his gaze fixed on a box of detergents in the corner of the room, Harold took a deep breath. It was like he was trying to remember something he never wanted to forget, or trying to forget something he never wanted to remember. A time when he wasn't treated like a burden. A time when his slow steps meant respect, not suspicion. The sound of the door opening again brought him out of his thoughts. One of the security guards entered, already with a tough stance, as if dealing with a habitual criminal. He spoke coldly, without looking him in the eye. "We need your identification. If you don't have it, you'll need to wait until the police arrive." Harold opened his wallet carefully. The leather was cracked. Inside, there were no shiny cards or banknotes, just old papers, worn-out photos, and what was left of a life full of silences that no one else wanted to hear. He hesitated. For a moment, he thought about not showing anything. Why should he prove who he was to people who had already decided who he wasn't? But then he looked at the half-open door. On the other side, they were still recording. They still laughed. They still judged. And he realized that maybe this was the last chance for someone to hear his story, even if by chance. If you've made it this far, perhaps you felt some of the pain Harold carried. Perhaps you have already been judged without anyone knowing what you experienced. Or maybe you know someone who went. If this type of story speaks to you in some way, I invite you to leave in the comments what it awakened within you. Sometimes, a simple comment can turn into a silent hug for someone who has been ignored too much. And if you believe that more people should hear stories like this, for real, without filter, with respect, then enjoy this video. This makes the message reach further. Show the algorithm that this type of content matters. And if deep down, you feel like you want to continue following stories that honor invisible lives and rescue forgotten memories, subscribe to the channel, because here, each story told is one more brick in the construction of something that cannot be erased. Dignity, legacy, memory. Outside, the market continued its routine. But inside that room, something was about to change. And one photo, folded in the corner of an old wallet, would be enough to turn everything inside out. The sound in the hallway was hurried footsteps, muffled voices, and cell phones vibrating with nervous notifications. On the other side of the metal door, a group of onlookers began to form, pressing their faces against the glass of the security room as if they were watching a show. Some recorded. Others laughed. No one there knew Harold's name. Nobody wanted to know. Inside, the air was heavy. The wall fan turned slowly, pushing a warm wind that didn't alleviate the suffocation. The neon light blinked and blinked, as if time hesitated to continue. Harold remained sitting, motionless, with the same posture he learned to maintain during long hours in foreign trenches. His eyes weren't there. They were somewhere far away, perhaps in a dusty desert in the east, or in a humid forest in Southeast Asia, where death whispered in every leaf. The manager, with his arms crossed, didn't know what to do. The presence of the police officer had changed the tone of the situation. But still, his pride was greater than his empathy. He pointed at the camera in the room and said coldly, "It's all recorded. If you want, we can go straight to the complaint. This isn't going to go away just because you have an old photo in your wallet." Harold looked at him firmly for the first time. Those eyes, sunken and marked by decades of loss, seemed to cut through any superficial judgment. "I also have things that don't go away," he replied, his voice low and sure. "Screams I hear every night. Faces I won't forget. Pain that doesn't film, but that never turns off." The officer looked at the manager, then at Harold, and was silent. There was no protocol for that. There was no teaching at the academy how to act in the face of a past that bleeds even in times of peace. Outside, someone shouted, "This old man is dangerous! Look at the way you're looking!" The comment brought laughter, but Harold was unfazed. He knew that look. The same thing that many civilians threw at soldiers who returned from war with their bodies intact, but their souls in pieces. The kind of judgment that never asks what happened, but always decides who should pay. As the minutes ran like a trickle of dirty water through the cracks in the floor, Harold stood there, waiting for something that he himself didn't know would come. Maybe justice, maybe just a human gesture. Anything that wasn't contempt. But nothing came. Just more silence. More uncomfortable. He leaned on the edge of the chair and with effort stood up. The sound of joints clicking in the awkward silence sounded louder than it should have. With his right hand, he took a small, folded piece of cloth from his pocket. It was the scarf from the old uniform, still with the initials embroidered on it. He unfolded it slowly, with a reverence that no one understood, except him. "I didn't want to cause confusion," he said in a firm voice. "I just wanted to buy milk, like any citizen. As someone who gave 32 years of life for this country, and who still believes that it can be treated with dignity." The policeman looked away. The manager took a deep breath, uncomfortable with the truth he couldn't ignore. Harold continued, "But you don't see that, right? You see an old man slowly, wearing worn-out clothes. A nuisance. A mistake. What you don't know is that these eyes have seen malnourished children, destroyed villages, brothers in uniform being torn to pieces just a few meters away. Do you think this is humiliation? You don't know what it's like to see your homeland forget who you were and treat you like no one else. The photo was still on the table. Now someone outside had taken an image of her through the glass. The scene would later go viral. But at that moment, no one imagined the impact that photograph would cause, nor the transformation that was to come. Harold turned his back slowly, like someone who decided to leave even without being invited. But before taking the first step, he stopped and looked up, as if he was seeking strength in some corner of the past. "I've been trapped before, only it was in the desert, surrounded by enemies," he whispered, more to himself than to whoever was there. It was this sentence that broke the silence. The policeman swallowed hard. The security guard looked down. The manager took a step back. And there, without raising his voice, Harold dismantled the invisible shield that protected the indifference of everyone in that place. There are situations in life that reveal much more about the observer than about the person being observed. And there, among stacked boxes and surveillance cameras, the real crime was not the error in the scanner. It was the lack of humanity in the eyes. The truth is that it wasn't Harold who was trapped in that room. It was everyone there who locked themselves inside their own ignorance. And before the tension dissipated, a new noise spread through the hallway. Someone approached, but it wasn't an employee. He wasn't a customer. And certainly it wasn't curious. Write it in the comments. This should never happen to anyone. Because when stories like this still repeat themselves, it's a sign that we need to keep telling them. And believe me, what was about to happen, no one in that market would ever forget it. The policeman's boots echoed through the hallway like hammers on concrete. The atmosphere, already tense, became suffocating. Two young agents entered with the attitude of those expecting trouble. None of them recognized Harold, but they didn't hesitate to treat him as a problem to be contained. They didn't know the story behind that bent body. They just saw an elderly man alone, accused of robbery, surrounded by accusing looks and cell phones recording. For them, it was just another calling. Harold tried to stand, but his right knee missed him. The same one that took shrapnel from a grenade years ago, and that since then has accompanied him like a memory embedded in his flesh. He fell with a loud thud, his body hitting the hard, filthy floor of the room. The impact elicited a low, contained groan, but deep enough to silence everyone there for a moment. The sound of the fall was more than physical. It was the sound of decades being ignored in seconds. No one ran to help him. No arms were extended. The security guard who had previously treated him as a threat only took half a step back. The manager looked at the floor as if he was the one bothering him now. The police, surprised, just watched. One of them came forward and, in a mechanical tone, asked, "Do you have any identification?" Harold, still kneeling, breathed heavily. His hands searched with effort for his coat pockets. They found his old wallet, already faded, sewn on the sides by himself. His hands shook as he opened it. There was no credit card inside, nor an updated driver's license. Just yellowed papers, a cracked piece of plastic with an old photo, and a rectangle of paper folded with extreme care. He didn't say anything. He didn't complain. He didn't cry. He just took the photo with trembling fingers and looked at it for a few seconds before returning it to his wallet and closing it slowly, as if that act were a sacred ritual that did not deserve hasty witnesses. The silence that followed was strange, uncomfortable, heavy. The younger officer approached and extended his hand, but not in a hurry, like someone who begins to realize that there is something there beyond the obvious. Harold didn't react. He continued to kneel. His eyes were distant, fixed on an invisible point, as if he were still on a battlefield where every decision could cost a life. The truth hidden there was not in the documents. It was on the marks. In the way he moved, in the tiredness permeated in his muscles, in the dignity he insisted on maintaining, even when surrounded by contempt. That man had been through things that no police manual taught how to deal with. And this began to become clear when the other officer noticed the small brooch attached to the inside flap of the wallet. A military badge, weathered but unmistakable. "Did you serve?" he asked more quietly, almost respectfully. Harold finally looked up and looked at the young man. His eyes, so tired, still had a sparkle. A glow that said, "I didn't give up on myself, even when everyone else had already given up." He nodded. Just that. I didn't need to say anything more. Because sometimes the truth speaks louder in silence. Outside, the movement increased. The news of an elderly man, caught stealing, was already in neighborhood groups. Short videos were circulated with cruel titles. None of them told what was really happening in that room. None of them showed the weight that man carried in his bones, nor the real reason for his fall. The hurried mentality of an immediate world is cruel. She doesn't wait for an explanation. She points the finger and moves on. But there, for a brief moment, time seemed to hesitate, as if something was about to change. The older officer lightly touched Harold's shoulder. He helped him to get up. The simple, almost imperceptible gesture generated a strange reaction among the others. The security guard took 2 steps back. The manager crossed his arms as if trying to protect himself from a truth that was revealing itself, a truth he had tried to ignore from the beginning. There was more to this man than he seemed. Harold straightened up with difficulty. The pain was visible on his face. The leg throbbed. My back hurt. But what hurt most was the contempt. The decision everyone had made for him before they even heard him speak. A decision based solely on appearance, on visible tiredness, on the fragility of someone who only wanted to buy the basics with the coins they had counted at home. It was at this moment that a voice echoed from the end of the corridor. It was firm, resolute, and sounded different from all the others. He had authority, but also empathy. Everyone turned around at the same time. Whoever was there was not part of the market. It wasn't security. He wasn't a customer, but he seemed to know exactly who Harold was. And before any reaction was possible, the door to the room opened completely. The presence of that figure changed everything. The tension spread like a new wind, making room for something no one expected. Write it in the comments. Judging without knowing is the real mistake. Because some appearances hide journeys that would change the way you see the world. And this one hasn't even started to be told yet. The man who appeared in the doorway was tall, robust, wearing a dark overcoat that contrasted with the cold, standardized uniforms of the police officers. His square jaw and firm eyes betrayed his time in the barracks, but it was something in his posture. That way of walking without haste, like someone who has carried wounded people on their shoulders and buried comrades with their own hands. That silenced the room. As soon as he saw Harold, his eyes changed. They didn't just recognize him, they respected him. It took Harold a few seconds to raise his head and notice his presence. But when he did, his tired expression faltered. There was a type of recognition there that was not translated into words nor into exaggerated gestures. It was something deeper, more human. An invisible thread, pulled by memories that only survive in the hearts of those who saw death up close and chose to return. The man took off his cap, took a deep breath, and said in a calm tone, but heavy with emotion, "How long has it been, Sergeant?" The sentence fell like restrained thunder. The younger officer took a half step back. The manager remained static, looking at the two as if he were watching a live movie. Harold tried to smile, but the physical pain, mixed with humiliation, made even the muscles in his face difficult. Still, he nodded, as if reviewing a forgotten piece of his own soul. "Colonel Mitchell," he answered with difficulty, his hoarse voice coming out like gravel. "I thought I would never see you again." Mitchell approached, not with pity, but with reverence. His eyes fell on the photo that still rested on the table. He took it with both hands, as if it were sacred. He remained silent for a few seconds, analyzing each face printed on the paper. Every mark of dirt, every crumpled uniform, every drop of blood immortalized in that image. His eyes stopped at the bottom corner of the photo, where a young Harold held what was left of a soldier, his face covered by a cloth. "That was in Fallujah, wasn't it?" he murmured. Harold confirmed with a slight nod. "The day the mission failed." The manager tried to intervene, as if trying to regain control of the situation, but the colonel raised his hand, cutting the air like a silent order. There was no longer room for bureaucratic explanations. What was happening there had no place in reports or protocols. It was the raw behind-the-scenes revelation of a story that none of them would ever understand. Mitchell looked around and, in a firm voice, declared, "This man here saved 14 lives that day." 14. While most retreated, he advanced. While many protected themselves, he carried bodies in his arms. When the evacuation failed, he stayed. He fought, and he survived. The silence became unbearable. The manager looked at the ground like a child who had just been caught red-handed. The security guard was sweating from his temples. The police didn't know where to put their hands. And Harold just breathed, with your chest still heavy, but now with a little more airspace. Mitchell turned to the manager. "And you really thought he was trying to steal milk?" It was as if each word pushed shame into the bones of whoever was there. There was no denying the transformation that took over the environment. Judgment dissolved into the ground, along with the remnants of ignorance. The colonel then extended his hand to Harold, with a respect that few in that room had witnessed in their lives. When their hands touched, it wasn't just a squeeze. It was a reunion of past and present, of pain and gratitude, of a forgotten man, and a man who remembered. But Harold didn't cry. Not yet. Because his heart knew that, despite that gesture, the wound was not healed. It wasn't about recognition of one. It was about the silence of many. It was about all the days he went out on the street, invisible. About the doors that closed, the looks that averted, the words that never came. And that's where the true impact of this story comes in. Because it's not just about Harold. This is about all the men and women who live among us, carrying invisible medals on their chests and daily battles on their shoulders. It's about the hasty decisions we make, the hidden truths we miss, the superficial mentality that judges before asking. Mitchell was still holding the photo. His eyes were teary, but he covered it up. "That day changed everything for me," he said. "And seeing you here, in this condition, makes me wonder how many more are going through this right now." The sentence hung in the air like a muffled punch. There was no defense, and as silence spread across the room for the third time that afternoon, Harold just closed his eyes for a second. Not to run away, but to remember. Because there are memories that hurt, and there are memories that save. Comment there. I also carry stories that no one sees. Because sometimes we just need to be reminded that there are still people who can see. And in this story, there is still more to be revealed. The silence that fell in the room was heavier than any scream. One of the police officers, the youngest, put his hand to his face, trying to contain the emotion that was already escaping his eyes. His lips trembled. He looked at Harold, then at the photo in Colonel Mitchell's hands, and whispered in a choked voice, as if reviving a buried memory. "My father." He spoke of a hero, a soldier who carried him in his arms as the shots rained down. "It was you, wasn't it?" Harold didn't respond with words. He just kept his gaze steady, a look that said yes with all the strength of someone carrying memories that no one ever asked to see. And at that moment, that young police officer, so used to arresting, judging, and moving on, felt small in the face of a legacy he didn't even know he was part of. He cried like a son who for the first time understood the size of the debt that the world owed to that old man with the stooped posture and low speech. The two previously haughty security guards now kept their heads down. The stance had changed, not out of fear, but out of shame. Shame that they judged someone by what he looked like, and not by what he had done for everyone. One of them mumbled something barely audible. "I was just following orders." But the sentence was lost in the air like a request that arrived too late. The manager, visibly disconcerted, tried to put the words together, tripping over himself. "Sorry, sir. We thought that you had..." But Harold cut it with the same serenity with which he faced the world every day. "You didn't find anything. You decided. The phrase hit home, like a truth too raw to ignore. There was nothing more to say, because he was right. They did not seek to understand. They judged. And deep down, they knew it. Meanwhile, outside the security room, something was starting to happen. The buzz grew. The news had already spread through the market like wildfire. Customers left their purchases on the conveyor belts. Employees left their jobs. A small crowd was forming, curious to know who this man was, who, minutes before, seemed like just another lost elderly man, and now seemed to be carrying a country on his shoulders. The glass in the room shook with cell phone flashes. But no one there imagined what would come next. A child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, appeared from the crowd. She passed by the adults as if guided by something she couldn't explain. In his hands, he was carrying a little American flag, the kind you buy in party stores, but which, in the right hands, takes on another meaning. She entered the room in silence. The big, sincere eyes looked at Harold for a moment. Then, without saying a single word, she held out the flag to him. It was a simple gesture. But there, in that room filled with judgment and pain, there was the weight of a statue being erected. Harold looked at the child with teary eyes. He picked up the flag carefully, as if it were made of glass. And then, for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Not a wide smile, but a smile full of truth, full of soul. The kind of smile that is only seen when dignity, even when damaged, finds shelter. The transformation in the air was visible. Something had changed. Not just in the way they looked at Harold, but in the way they looked at each other. It was as if, for the first time, the masks had fallen off, and what was left there was just humanity. Colonel Mitchell stood up and walked to the door. He turned to everyone and said, "There are more Harolds out there. Many. You just don't see them. Because you don't want to see them. And this is where everything starts to take on a new dimension. Because what seemed like the end of a humiliation was just the beginning of a much greater revelation. A journey that goes beyond a supermarket, beyond injustice. It's about recognition. About decisions that cost dearly. About a country that urgently needs to learn to listen before pointing. And it doesn't matter how much time has passed. There are wounds that only begin to heal when they are seen. Write it in the comments. Respect is not asked for. It is recognized. Because stories like this still have a lot to show. The next morning, the market opened its doors to a strange, almost respectful silence. No music played on the speakers. No promotional announcements echoed through the hallways. It was as if the building itself understood that something bigger had happened there. Something that no discount tag could erase. On the glass facade, hanging just above the automatic doors, a white banner with large, simple letters read, "Today and always, respect our veterans." It was a short sentence, but it was full of everything that had been ignored the day before. And, for many, it was also a belated attempt to remedy what should never have happened. The atmosphere of the city seemed different. And it wasn't just because of the cloudy sky or the light wind that passed between the streetlights. There was something in the air, a kind of collective pause, as if people had woken up with an invisible wound in their chest and were trying to understand how they had let it happen. Local newspapers printed Harold's face on the cover. A man who yesterday was treated like no one else was now making headlines with words like hero, resilience, and redemption. The city hall acted quickly, maybe out of pressure, maybe out of conscience. A ceremony was hastily arranged, improvised, but sincere. The market parking lot became a stage. Folding chairs lined up in timid rows, a microphone was plugged in on top of a wooden crate, and a group of local veterans arrived wearing their old uniforms. Clothes that no longer fit perfectly, but still carried the soul of those who fought for something bigger than themselves. Harold arrived slowly, leaning on his usual cane. He was wearing the same flannel shirt as the day before, but now with the small flag that the child had given him tucked discreetly in his pocket. The tired face still showed the marks of injustice, but the eyes had something else. It was a contained glow, like someone who expected nothing else from life. And yet, he was surprised by something he thought he had lost forever. When he stepped onto the small makeshift stage, silence took over. It wasn't the silence of indifference. It was the silence of reverence. It was as if, for a moment, every person there wanted to give him back the years that the country pretended not to see. The mayor said a few words. He spoke of mistakes, of recognition, of honor. The market manager was also there, in the corner, visibly embarrassed, holding a bouquet of flowers that looked more like a voiceless apology. But no one paid much attention to what they said. Everyone expected only one thing: Harold's speech. A local radio reporter, with a microphone in his hand and a recorder stuck in his pocket, stood up and asked the question everyone wanted to hear. "Mr. Harold, what would you like to say to the people who judged you yesterday, who treated you like a thief?" Harold took the microphone with firm hands. There was no rehearsal. There was no speech ready. But there was truth. The kind that doesn't need to be memorized, because it was felt. "I spent my entire life fighting to make the people around me feel safe. I fought for families I never knew. I buried friends who had plans to return and get married. I returned home with my body intact, but my soul broken. And yet, I moved on. I worked. I contributed. I lived in the shadows, as many do, without asking for anything in return. And yet, yesterday, I was treated as a threat, like a problem." He paused. The wind swayed the banner at the top of the facade, and the soft rustle of fabric fluttering seemed to fill the space between his words. "But today, you gave me something that the war took away, and that I thought I would never have again. You gave me the right to be seen." The silence that followed did not last, because seconds later the applause started. 1, 2, 3, until they become a wave. It wasn't just a polite gesture. It was a collective request for forgiveness, a delayed recognition, an attempt to give him back, and so many others, the space that haste and prejudice stole for years. Many cried. Some shook each other's hands. An elderly woman in the third row took a medal out of her pocket and held it to her chest. Another man, younger, whispered to his son, "See him? This one is a real hero." But the most beautiful thing wasn't in what was said in public. It was between the lines. In the teary eyes of the police officer who now stood by Harold's side, like a silent bodyguard. In the gesture of Colonel Mitchell, who didn't let go of the photo, as if it were a piece of his own soul. In the silence of the crowd that, instead of leaving when the event ended, stayed there, just watching, just respecting. It is in these moments that we understand that respect is not built with nice words. It is built with attitude, with presence, with listening, with transformation. And if you're still here, feeling every detail of this story, maybe you understand what this journey has to teach. Because the world doesn't change when we speak louder. It changes when we stop forgetting. Comment there. Being seen changes everything. Because some wounds don't need medicine. They just need the truth. And Harold's, it wasn't the last. There's more coming. The clouds were slowly moving over the city when Harold decided to return to the market. It had been a few days since the ceremony, since the applause, since his name was finally said with the respect that had been denied him for so long. He was in no hurry. Never had. I had learned that life does not happen at the speed of cars or clocks. It happens in the silence between one step and another. And that day, each step seemed to echo with a new weight, different from the one that weighed him down before. The cane tapped the ground rhythmically, almost like a slow march. It was no longer the walk of the invisible man. It was that of someone who had finally been seen, but who, even so, continued with the same serene look as before. The same look as someone who has faced bombs and lost brothers. The same look of someone who knows that pain does not end with recognition. She just changes places. When he entered the glass door of the market, no one screamed. Nobody applauded. But each person who saw him lowered their head slightly, as if revering something they now understood. A cashier stopped serving for a moment and looked up. A security guard opened the way without saying a word. A packaging employee smiled sideways, with teary eyes as if he wanted to say, "Sorry," without using his voice. But it was there, in the ATM line, that Harold froze for a moment. The same place, the same floor, the same scanner where it all started. But now, right above the machine, there was a simple sign, made of white acrylic with gold letters that said, "Preferred line, Heroes." That sentence carried no medals. It did not mention names, but to Harold it said more than any speech ever heard. He put the same things in the cart as always: rice, milk, food. And this time, no one was watching him with suspicion. Not because he had changed, but because the way they saw him now was different. A silent transformation that doesn't come from talking, comes from listening. While waiting for his turn, a childish voice took him out of his thoughts. "Are you the soldier in the photo?" He turned around slowly. It was a boy, no more than 7 years old, holding his mother's hand. His eyes were fixed, full of curiosity, not out of fame, but out of respect. A type of pure curiosity, which is born when a child sees a symbol in front of him. Harold smiled. Not that obligatory smile. Not the smile you give to avoid conversation. It was a real smile, full of everything he had felt in life, and he replied, "I'm just a man." But in that war, all men became brothers. The boy's mother looked at him with gratitude and whispered something in her son's ear. The boy nodded, shook Harold's hand, and said softly, "Thank you for everything, sir." And he left, carrying in his heart a memory that he might not have been able to explain, but that he would never forget. At the end of the purchase, Harold approached the preferred cashier. The young attendant, his eyes visibly touched, greeted him with a welcome back that sounded like a hug. There were no more sirens. There were no more cutting looks. There was only one veteran and his story. On the way out, just before the automatic door opened, Harold noticed a painting hanging on the wall next to the customer service desk. It was the photo. That same one, old, in black and white, with faces covered in mud and eyes marked by everything that wasn't said. Below, a simple caption: Sergeant Harold Brooks, 3rd Division. Fallujah, 1968. Some men fight for victory, others for the lives of their brothers. He stopped in front of the image, as if looking inside. He wasn't surprised. He just respected it. It was there, in that frame, that his past was now remembered not as a burden, but as a legacy. A piece of hidden truth that for a long time was forgotten. And although he knew that the world still had a lot to learn, Harold left with a little lighter chest. Because in that place where he was humiliated, there was now a space that said, "We remember." This is the type of transformation that is not measured in likes or headlines. It's a transformation of mindset. How we see each other. How we treat those who carry scars that cannot be seen with the naked eye. Harold did not seek justice. He sought humanity. And in that supermarket aisle, between the product shelves and the routine shelves, he found a little of that. Write it in the comments. All honor begins with the look. Because respect is not about grand gestures. It's about not forgetting to see. And there is still a lot of story waiting to be seen. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. And honestly, that already says a lot about who you are. Not everyone stops to listen until the end, feel every detail, and reflect on what really matters. If this content made sense to you, if it brought you any memories, or even changed the way you see certain things a little, subscribe to the channel here. We are building a space where stories like Harold's gain a voice, and where people like you make all the difference. Leave your like, not because someone asked you to, but because you felt the connection. This helps keep this message alive and reach those who also need to hear it. And if you want to leave a sign that you stayed with me until the end, comment below. I saw Harold until the last step. I will know that you were part of this journey from beginning to end. There is a video here that complements this story and brings another perspective that is very worthwhile. Click and stay with me there. The next story will also resonate with you.